Welcome to One on One with Mitch, Lafon, and joining me on this episode, it is authors Brad Tolinski and Alan Perna. Their new book is called Play It Loud, an epic history of the style, sound, and revolution of the electric guitar, with a foreword by Carlos Santana. Before checking out my interview with them, please check me out on Twitter at Mitch Lafon, MITCHLAFON, and you can also head over to talkingmetal.com for all my interviews. So now, here they are, the one, the only, Brad Tolinski and Alan Perna. We are speaking with the authors of Play It Loud, an epic history of style, sound, and the revolution of the electric guitar. Authors Brad Tolinski and Alan Perna. Let me start with you, Brad. Pleasure to have you here. Nice talking to you.
Well, thanks for having us on, Mitch.
Yeah, I'm
very excited to be here.
Yeah, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing about this book and about everything going on. And Alan, a great pleasure to have you as well.
Oh, thanks, Mitch. It's very good to be here.
So, let's start off with the sort of the softball questions here. What was the concept that you both had of putting together this book? And, you know, does it just come from a great passion? What was the reason to tell this story? Let's start with you, Brad.
Well, Alan and I had been working in the sort of niche vein of guitar journalism for probably like the last 3 decades. And what was really interesting to both of us was that when we were looking around for books or whenever we would get books about the guitar, they'd either be really super nerdy, like, you know, how to build a pickup or how to, you know, what kind of screws go into a guitar, or they'd be, you know, really these sort of general, you know, beautiful coffee table books with just pictures of guitars. And nothing really ever seemed to get at the history or the cultural significance of the guitar, which has become, you know, such an icon in, you know, worldwide, sort of like the automobile. And we both realized that there was this, you know, there's sort of this gap for the really cool, you know, story of how this instrument came to be so popular and why it holds such interest for players and listeners alike.
Yeah, and so talk to me, Alan, about your attraction to getting or your reason for wanting to be a part of this project.
Well, you know, in a way, it's the realization of what brought Brad and I together really 25 years ago. I don't know if you remember, Brad, but you introduced yourself to me at a trade convention, at a NAMM show, which is a convention for musical instruments. And I'd been writing, you know, maybe for like 9 or 10 years by that time. And I had really been trying to do something different and innovative. I thought that writing about not only guitars, but all musical instruments was, as Brad said, you know, sort of dull, more of a chore to read, more like if you're a guitar player, it's your duty to read this stuff. You know, it's not something you're going to curl up in bed with and really enjoy yourself. And I was looking for ways to break through that. I had been writing for Musician magazine, a few others, and Brad came up to me and said, "Hey, you know, I really like your work. I'd like for us to work together." He, shortly after that, became the editor-in-chief of Guitar World, and we were united in this common cause. It was like, how can we make this stuff more interesting? How can we bring it to life? I always say, while I'm interested in the guitar, I'm much more interested in the people who play the guitar. And the people who make guitars. So all throughout our years together at Guitar World, we were always looking for ways to innovate, to bring a new level of professionalism to the field, and to
entertain.
And you know, pay the rent, and so basically, you know, 2 years ago or so, we found ourselves in a position where we had both interviewed many of the legendary players and makers, and Brad kind of suggested, hey, maybe it's time for us to pool our resources, pool our collective intellectual wealth, and come up with this definitive cultural history of the electric guitar.
Yeah, and it really is a wonderful book. But okay, so let's start talking about some of the inventions and some of the players and not some of all this.
Nita Strauss, who's in Alice Cooper's band, is going to be part of She Rocks Volume 1, which also includes Lita Ford and Orianthi and all that. Brad, you're going to be involved in that project. First of all, since we're talking about the history of rock and the history of rock guitar, do you think that women in rock have gotten a fair shake? And if not, why do you think they've sort of always been sort of second? Why is there not a guitar hero like an Eddie Van Halen or a Jimi Hendrix that is female?
Well, I think the sort of the beginnings of guitar and making the electric guitar was always sort of a boys' club. You know, it started in the 40s and the 50s when times were very different, and you know, the guys went to work and the women stayed home. And I think it just sort of stayed in that kind of place. It's always been a bit of a boys' club. And maybe it has to do with, you know, sort of the rough and tumble world of touring and the music business in general, that it's stayed somewhat of a boys' club. And, you know, I've talked to many women that have said that they've gone into the music stores and, you know, never really receive any respect. They find the environment sort of intimidating. So there've been a lot of reasons over the years maybe why women have been marginalized in this area. But over the last, I don't know, I guess maybe 10 years, you know, I just see attitudes changing. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and when I go to clubs these days, it always seems that bands are half guys and half girls. Whatever those inhibitions were, they've seemed to have completely opened up, and a lot of women right now are engaging with the instrument in a super creative way. And, you know, Steve Vai, whose label Favored Nations, came to me and said, you know, we'd like you to produce a record, and what would you do? And I said, well, you know, it's there's a wealth of incredibly creative women out there that are doing amazing work and need to be spotlighted more. So we decided to put a compilation record out of these women.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to that. Did the media have any part in that? You know, looking back on the day, did Guitar World and Revolver feature enough of the players, or was it just there wasn't any to be featured, even if we had wanted to?
I think the latter is true. Right. You know, it wasn't like there was any policy to keep women out. I mean, and there have been, we have sort of featured them through the years. You know, Lita Ford or Vixen back in the hair metal days, and you know, all through the alternative rock sort of thing. You know, Sonic Youth or L7 or you know, Hole, and even now St. Vincent. But it just has been a minority. And you know, the other thing was we weren't going to, you know, go in the opposite direction, just feature a woman just because she was a woman, if we didn't feel, you know, the playing was up to snuff, just like the way we would treat men.
Yeah, and that seems reasonable. Alan, looking at some, and I'll move on from the women question in a second, but Alan, looking back at some of the great women players, who are the ones that stand out? I mean, we always go, well, Eddie Van Halen and Jimi Hendrix and Carlos Santana, but if you had to look at Jennifer Batten and Orianthi, who are the ones that stand out and go, yeah, that's the real deal right there?
Oh, well, I should preface my answer by saying that my very first piece for Guitar World was a piece on three women players. Jan Kunemund from Vixen, Lita Ford.
There you go. There you go. And, now we're talking.
And Jennifer Batten, you know, who were all really leaders in their field at the time. And I think I began the piece by making an analogy to the Elizabethan theater in Shakespeare's time. Women were not even permitted to perform, to act on the stage. Female roles were played by boys or men in those days. So, you know, we've certainly come a long way in that regard. outstanding players for me. As a teenager, I always admired people like Memphis Minnie, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Elizabeth Cotton, pioneering players. I'm an upside down left-handed guitarist, so when I first saw Libba Cotton, I really flipped. Like, hey, wow, there's a way to do this. And in today's world, I really admire the work that St. Vincent is doing. I'm not much of a shred guy. I'll be honest with you. That's more Brad's department. So I know a lot of astounding work is being done there, and I can certainly respect the the technique and the mastery and the dedication involved. But I'm more excited by someone like St. Vincent, who is a graduate of Annie Clark, who's a graduate of the Berklee School of Music, and everything in a resume leads you to expect, it's going to be 4-hour-long solos of progressive fusion, but her music is anything but. It's very accessible. It's very inventive, very avant-garde. So, and I'm encouraged by the great diversity of styles in current guitar playing. Both genders. I don't really see a need to genderize this field, but there's Yeah, but there's someone like Gemma Thompson in the Savages, in the Anglo-French group, really beautiful tone, beautiful lines. She has a wonderful way of complimenting the lead singer. All across the board, I think that there's a lot of innovative work being done currently in the electric guitar.
There really is. And just to mention, I'm hearing all kinds of background noise going on, which ends up on the audio. So we just sort of have to be careful with that, if that's okay. Let's look at some of the inventions that the guitar went through over the years. One in particular, because I am a hard rock, heavy metal guy. I like that kind of stuff. Floyd Rose. How important was the Floyd Rose locking tremolo to the advancement of guitar and guitar technique? And we'll start with Brad.
Well, for a particular era of players, it became an incredibly important thing. As soon as Ed Van Halen started doing more and more different techniques using the whammy bar, he was trying to do a bunch of things, and it just hit a ceiling, because every time he would go there, his guitar would go out of tune. So the Floyd almost became a necessity for him to really explore the guitar in the way that he did. And then you had people who sort of jumped on that bandwagon, like Steve Vai and Joe Satriani, and that whole sort of shredder school. They ended up building sounds and techniques just around the idea of a locking tremolo. So for it's still being used these days, but I would say, for the 80s, it was a crucial invention.
What is sort of the most, in your opinion, the most important innovation to the electric guitar? Alan?
Yeah, well, there were so many. We wouldn't have anything at all without the electromagnetic pickup. That was really first perfected by George Beecham back in the late 1920s and early 30s. People didn't know what to amplify. They knew they wanted the instrument to be louder. Traditional acoustic guitar making wisdom said that the top of the guitar, because it vibrates, that's the source of the sound. So people were trying to put microphones on that and all kinds of stuff. They were trying the bridge, but it was Beecham who figured out that no, the string is the thing. The most pure and direct source of vibration, sound vibration, is the guitar string. And if you have a steel string, you can use it to interact with the magnetic field, fluctuations in the magnetic field, change that into an electrical current, and bingo, you've got the electric guitar. If that hadn't happened, and there were prior attempts that didn't employ that principle, If that didn't happen, we'd all be playing clarinets and trumpets now.
Wouldn't that be interesting, right? To hear a Jimi Hendrix solo done by clarinet. Brad, do you share that opinion? That's sort of the important development, or is there something more recent that you think has changed the way the electric guitar is used?
Well, the pickup is the foundation of it all, and even something like the 1/4-inch jack, that you plug into the guitar with it. Everybody takes for granted these days. That was far from a standard thing in the beginning of the guitar. Early models had like bare wires and patch cords that were wired into the guitar itself. So just the simple jack, I mean, that became like a super practical kind of thing that had to come around.
What, in your opinion, makes a great guitarist? You look at somebody like Angus Young or maybe Ace Frehley, who aren't maybe the most technically proficient, but they play for the song. And if you took, Steve Vai and stuck him in the middle of Kiss, it probably wouldn't sound right. Or is it a guy like Steve Vai or Yngwie Malmsteen that can sort of play a million notes? Or is it somebody that's more feel-oriented, like Stevie Ray Vaughan or Carlos Santana? What's the most important thing to be a great guitarist, in your opinion?
Well, I think it comes down to one simple word: soul.
Right.
And an ability to connect emotionally with the listener. And I think that you find that in all levels of playing. I mean, that's why Angus or Keith Richards are so compelling. Keith's solo in Sympathy for the Devil is one of the greatest guitar solos ever. I think many people would agree, but yet, not that hard to play, not that hard to reproduce. The notes, at least, the subtleties of tonality and expression are something else. And I think even the greatest shredders, I mean, what I value about Satriani and Vai in particular is that although there's a dazzling amount of technical proficiency going on there, these guys are rocking. They are they're connecting. They're saying something with the instrument. Frank Zappa is another cardinal example of that. Really, really, really a monster of a player, but yet although his stuff was avant-garde and et cetera, when he plays a solo, you feel it. You feel it in your heart. You feel it in your soul, and that's the acid test.
Yeah, that really is.
Yeah, I think that it's sort of interesting, like how you move, how your fingertips connect with the strings of the guitar. It's almost like a fingerprint. I mean, it's very difficult for one person to sound like another person, and it gets down to that very basic thing: the connection between the fingers on the strings and the art of moving them in certain ways to produce a certain sound. People pick up on that. That's where the artistry comes in. And for everybody, it's completely different,
Yeah, it really
and
is.
unique.
Let me take it again. I'm a rock guy, so let's look at the 1990s. Grunge came into great fashion, and the hair metal days were all over. But most of their songs had no guitar solos. They decided that we didn't need that for the song. What is your take on that? Was that a mistake? And do songs really need guitar solos? Like, why do you think they sort of pushed it to the background?
Yeah, well, I think.
Go ahead, Brad.
Go ahead, Alan. Oh, okay. Well, I think what had happened was that the level of virtuosity in the 80s took over guitar playing. And it was intimidating to any new player to even pick up the instrument, to think that you had to play like Eddie Van Halen or Yngwie Malmsteen at that high technical level. And I think what grunge did was a super healthy thing for the guitar, which was, create songs. Somebody like Kurt Cobain created songs that anybody could play. It was more of a punk rock aesthetic. And that really encouraged, I think, kids all over the place to really feel confident that they could, pick up an instrument and play music, and it revived the guitar in a certain way. But it's also a little bit of a misnomer. I mean, you did have great soloists in the grunge era. They just approached it from a little different way. Like Kim Thayil of Soundgarden was pretty phenomenal on every level. And, Vernon Reid, even, Living Color, all that stuff. There was a lot of interesting things going on. Yeah.
True, though it wasn't. I guess it wasn't framed in the song in the same sort of context as it had been all through the '80s and even the '70s. Alan, what was your take on that?
Well, I would basically agree with Brad. A guy like Mike McCready in Pearl Jam, there was room for guitar solos within grunge music. But I think it's just a matter of the song is king. No matter what musical genre you're dealing with, it's always all about the song. And if you write songs, and if you play in a band, sooner or later you realize that the song tells you, you're not the boss. The song tells you what it needs. Some songs need a guitar solo, some songs don't. It all depends on how verses, choruses, bridges, intros, pre-choruses all line up. Certain songs don't necessarily call for that. I mean, there are a lot of great organ solos in rock. Certain songs call for different sorts of things. Right. California Dreamin' by the Mamas and Papas. All right, it's not a rock song; it's a pop song, but it's got a goddamn flute solo, and it's beautiful, and it's perfect for that song. If you tried to put a flute solo in a Van Halen song, well, hey, it ain't going to work. So
it's not going to fly as great. Yeah, no, it's true. I know we've reached 20 minutes, but if you have a couple more minutes, I had just some of the names in rock, great guitarists that I just would like to run by you if possible. Is that okay?
Sure.
So let's start, and I'll sort of pick them a little bit randomly, but let's start off with one of the names that comes up over and over again, just for the historical significance. Robert Johnson, what did he bring to the playing and to the forefront with his style, Brad?
Well, the thing that Robert Johnson, he was one of the first guys to do it that almost any player can relate to. I mean, Robert did a lot of cool things, but one of the things that he really brought into play was that thing in the blues. He was really one of the first guys to do that, and he was sort of imitating, a piano boogie thing on the guitar. But he was an incredible player. But he also helped create the mythology of the guitar, and maybe that was just as important. The idea of selling your soul to the devil to learn how to play the instrument or to be great at the instrument. That's a great sort of mythic thing that, added sort of sex and mystique to the guitar and sort of got its way into the blues and rock and roll.
Yeah, I agree. Ace Frehley of Kiss, often imitated, not often duplicated. Many people will say that it's very sloppy and it's very this and that, and yet you can't really do what he does if you don't have his fingers. What's your take on Ace?
I'm going to let Brad take that one too.
Okay.
Well, what they say is that it's in a certain way the instrument doesn't lie. And I think that if you ever met Ace, and I've talked to Ace on a number of occasions, the guy totally has this really skewed way of looking at the world, and he's much smarter and much more creative than maybe what people might think, because they call him the space ace. And I think that sort of loopy, off-kilter personality that he has sort of translates into his playing. I mean, those crazy wide vibratos on the string, that's like Ace just staggering across the stage. Like I said, the instrument doesn't lie, and that in his sort of personality, I think, comes through, and people enjoy that. I mean, people like the life of the party, and that's what Ace is.
Go ahead.
He's very funny as well. Yeah, and I think that humor comes across a little bit. I remember him reducing me to stitches, telling me about a car. You know, it wasn't a serious car accident, so it wasn't a sad story. But he was in a car accident in L.A. on the 101, and his airbags deployed, and there's all this white powder all over the place, and he began to get paranoid because he thought it was cocaine, and he couldn't quite remember.
That's funny.
That's you know, and stuff like this, like, you know, like Brad says, stuff like this comes across in the playing somehow. I mean, it's you know, it's you know.
Look, everybody knows Paul and Gene are tight ass, so it's really that Ace is the one that's bringing the rock and roll to the joint, you know.
It really is, and it's funny because, and talking of your stories, I've interviewed Ace many times, and there was one time where we were talking, and he stops and says, "Oh, hold on a second," and you hear sort of a cash register sound and stuff, and I go, "What was that?" He goes, "Oh, I'm at the mattress store. I'm buying a mattress, and I had to pay for it." And I was like, but we're in the middle of an interview. Like, what are you doing? Anyway, so you know, that's that. One of the sort of, you know, growing up in the 70s and 80s, everybody had to be Jimi Hendrix. Everybody had to play like Jimi Hendrix. He was the guy. What's your take on Jimi Hendrix? Was he the guy? Has it grown into this myth that's beyond reality? Is he overrated? What did he bring? And sort of, what's your take on Jimi?
Well, I think that what was really unique about Hendrix is the way he synthesized so many different things. He was coming off the African American Chitlin circuit. He had really aced the R&B and blues thing. You can certainly hear a lot of Buddy Guy in his playing, but he was also very hip to what was happening in England in the mid '60s. He was a fan of Jeff Beck's works with the Yardbirds. One of the first things he wanted to do on arriving in England was meet Pete Townsend, and the first question to Pete is, what kind of amps do you use? So he was drafting in the use of feedback that Townsend had pioneered, and a certain aggressive style of playing, windmills, banging your guitar against the amp, and all the kind of sonic potential and dramatic stage potential that existed there. So he put together those two things with an ability to write songs that his manager Chaz Chandler helped him to cultivate, with, you know, incredibly good-looking guy, charismatic performer, great singer. So he was the first guitar hero who was sort of the total package. I think that where he's not overrated, but there's a kind of naive appreciation of Hendrix on the part of people who may not be as aware of what Beck was doing in the Yardbirds. They may not have heard of Mike Bloomfield. They may not, you know, their awareness of the Who probably begins with Tommy in 1969. So they're not as aware of, and they may not know the blues that well, you know, the Chicago blues. So a lot of this, like, wow, he must have been from outer space, is actually, if you look at it, no, you can find all the sources and influences right here on planet Earth, but no one put them together quite like Hendrix.
Yeah, he really didn't. I'll give you like three or four more names. B.B. King.
B.B. King.
Well, B.B.
Yeah.
B.B. You know, he was the guy that sort of embodies this thing that we're talking about, which is, you know, your fingers on the string and having a distinct personality. I mean, B.B. is known, if nothing else, for his vibrato that he applies to a lot of his notes. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful, expressive sounds in the history of music. And the other great thing about B.B. was, in addition to being a great player, was he was one of the great ambassadors, you know, for the blues. He could operate, you know, in the blackest nightclubs, and also meet like his white audience halfway too. And I think in doing that, he really, really did a lot to bring the blues to a wider audience. But it's that signature, it's that vibrato that separates him from his peers.
And you know, that's one of the things I like in the book, by the way, is that you have done all these interviews with a lot of these artists, including Steve Vai and stuff, and you tell the story through their voice as well, which is quite fascinating. Brad, I'll ask you this one, and then we'll wrap it up. But Randy Rhoads, unfortunately, we didn't get a lot of Randy on record.
Right.
What do you think he did for the scene? Because Ozzy came out of Sabbath, and he needed this guy, and Randy was just absolutely what the doctor ordered.
Right. Well, it's sort of, Randy in some ways was almost a bit like what Alan was saying regarding Jimmy. He was a great synthesizer of different things that were in the air. I mean, you had guys like Richie Blackmore and Yngwie, exploring more sort of European sounding scales, more classical sounding scales. And then you had a guy out in California around the same time named Eddie Van Halen, who were doing all these different techniques with harmonics and tapping and dive bombs with his whammy bar. And Randy took sort of all those things that were floating in the air and brought them into unique, into a unique sound. And I think, and rightly so, when you're playing heavy metal, a lot of the early metal guys just used to sort of bring in blues licks to everything, or sort of soup up blues licks. And Randy was like, this music should be something that's different, distinctly different than the blues. And I think he really sort of created the vocabulary of heavy metal that, most guitar players adopted, from then on.
I really think so. Alan, I'll throw one at you here. Prince, everybody talks about his stage presence and the songwriting and all the crazy stuff that he did, but at the end of the day, he was a phenomenal guitar player, right? Am I wrong in saying that?
No, you're absolutely right. He indeed was. I got in the 90s, I got to witness a show in Minneapolis that he did in his club, so like a small club setting for, Prince and his band. And there's a lot of just amazing soloing. What impressed me the most about him on that occasion and on many others is sort of the breadth of his vocabulary. As we're saying about all of these greats, he was referencing a lot of different styles. There was some really serious deep R&B roots in what he was playing, but there was a lot of just straight out rock playing. Referenced the blues a little bit. He incorporated this whole vocabulary of guitar playing into his unique songwriting vision in a way that's really, phenomenal, and has I doubt if we'll ever see its like again. And again, it kind of gets back to what I was saying earlier, though. Every note he plays is in service of the songs that he wrote. So yeah.
His confidence is always what sort of blew me away. I mean, whether it was an act or how he learned it, but you believed every note, that he was in control of literally every note that was going to come out of that instrument. And he did the whole thing while, running around and dancing and doing this and that. And if anybody out there, plays guitar or knows what it takes to play what he was playing, plus doing the stage moves that he was doing, that it required just hours and hours of dedication and practice.
Yeah, and it's strange how he gets overlooked, because there was just a finesse to what he was doing. Listen, I could go on and on with all these great players, from Stevie Ray Vaughan to Keith Richards to Slash to Carlos Santana. I mean, they're all, and the foreword to your book was, of course, by Carlos, so there's a lot of great information there. I will finish with this one then. One of my favorites, Eddie Van Halen. Did he revolutionize guitar playing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Eddie changed everything. What had happened, and he did it in such a sort of interesting, naive kind of way. I'll try to make this tight, but, what had happened during the mid-'60s is that Fender and Gibson, the quality of their instruments started to decline a bit. And Eddie, as a young man, was sort of coming up and trying to find a guitar that he liked. And he just wasn't buying what these guys were selling. He didn't know that the quality had gone down or anything like that. He just wasn't able to hear what he wanted to hear in his head. So he set about creating a guitar that would do everything that he wanted it to do. And in doing so, created a revolution. I mean, he made guitar players completely look at not only the technique of playing it, but how guitars were built in a totally different way. The importance of his contribution, cannot be overlooked. I mean, it's often overshadowed by his tremendous playing, but what he did on a technical level by combining elements of Fender guitars with the elements of Gibson guitars with, the Floyd Rose system, is been hugely influential for the last 3 decades.
Well, in fact, let me just quote straight from your book. You said, in a mere minute 42, the solo guitar instrumental Eruption changed the way the electric guitarist looked at the instrument forever. Did anybody else do that? I mean, was he sort of the only one that was able to just, in that moment in time, just change the entire sort of history or the arc of guitar playing?
I think there have been a few.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Al.
Well, I was gonna cite Les Paul was the first guy who really explored and pioneered this idea of a player who could and would also customize his instrument. The whole concept that the pickups, the vibrato arm, whatever it is can be customized to suit your style, and in a way, the hardware is an extension of your style. I would point to him. I would point to Pete Townsend, who worked with Jim Marshall to create the first Marshall amp. I mean, rock, as we know it today, wouldn't be rock without the 100-watt Marshall amp, and Pete didn't build it himself, but that was another instance of a player who said, I'm not hearing what I want out of anything that's out there. Actually, he brought one of his Fenders in the Marshall and threw it down on the counter, and he said, "I want this twice as loud." There have been a handful of players who kind of see customizing the instrument as part of their technique, if you will.
Yeah, but of course, just in itself, though, Eruption is one of those moments in time where you just go, okay, now we're talking. Now we're at a different level, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember clearly hearing it when I was a kid, and this was these were the days before the internet, or the band had just come out, and I could literally not figure out how the heck this guy was doing it. I mean, as soon as any guitar player heard that, he was on the hot foot to try to figure it out. And I will say that by doing that kind of thing, by opening those doors, it wasn't just, Eddie's great, but he inspired a lot of other players just to look at the instrument in a completely different way. Yeah. He forced us to all become more creative, and that's really a great gift.
Yeah, I agree. In terms of the future for both yourself and Alan, are we working on a second book about guitars? Are we going to do a series where we talk about amps and drums and this and that, or sort of this? Is this what's next for you?
That would be telling.
Okay.
We do have a really cool idea for a follow-up to this guy, and I think it'll be a bit different than everybody thinks, but we're in the midst of trying to convince our publisher now to do it. So we have to keep it under lock and key. But we do have an idea for a follow-up guitar book.
That's fantastic.
We really like working together. Because we've been working together for so many years, there's almost this telepathic level of communication. I mean, we have phone calls for hours, kind of tossing concepts back and forth, refining ideas. So, yeah, we're always thinking of the next move.
That's great. It's been a great pleasure talking with you, Brad and Alan. And the book, of course, Play It Loud, An Epic History, Style, Sound, and Revolution of the Electric Guitar. Out now, definitely worth picking up. It is a fascinating read. And like you say, it's not just a collection of pictures of beautiful guitars. I mean, it actually tells a compelling story. And I think that was truly lacking in sort of the library of musicians to have a book like this. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mitch.
Absolutely. It's been a great pleasure. And I look forward to doing another one when the new book comes out.
Yes. I was going to tell you before, when we were talking about solos versus songs.
Yeah.
I remember a moment of having to dig through a Dokken record because I had to interview George Lynch. And all I did was fast forward through all the songs to get to the guitar solos because all of the songs were so terrible. my opinion. That's my opinion. You may not share that, being a headbanger, but oh my God,
Well, listen, I have an appreciation for Doc, and I'm friends with Don. He did some great stuff for me. Well, I'll tell you this. Years ago, 2013, my wife's father passed away from prostate cancer, and he had been in a palliative care home. And I did this tribute record called "A World with Heroes," and I phoned up a bunch of these people and. I talked to Don and I said, could you? And he did a song, Cold Gin. He donated the song. He donated his time. And, Jeff Pilson also. They've been really, really nice and kind to me. And you'll never hear me say a bad thing about anybody in Doc. And George, you got to love him too. You got to love George.
George is an incredible player, and I always found his solos to be entertaining. But I just found Dokken songs to be a bit, by rote, that kind of thing.
Sure, and that's fair, and I think that's what makes music great. I mean, if every one of us liked the same 10 Bjork songs, I think life would be uninteresting. So,
and very weird.
Yeah, it would be. So it's perfectly fine and normal and natural that we all like different stuff, and that's what makes things great. And that, by the way, what makes guitaring great. Because I'm looking at a list of names I had picked out here, from Slash to Keith Richards to David Gilmour to Chuck Berry to Brian May. They're not doing the same thing, and that's what's wonderful about the instrument, because it really is just the same instrument, but it's different people, different interpretations, different soul, different emotion, and that's why the guitar is just such a fascinating instrument, and why it's been so culturally significant for so long now, And your book certainly helps tell that story. So great on you, as they say in Canada. Thank you for your time today, by the way.
Okay, thank you, Mitch.
Have a good day.
Well. Thank you.
Bye now.
And there you have it, folks, my interview with Brad Tolinski and Alan Perna. The new book is Play It Loud, An Epic History of the Style, Sound, and Revolution of the Electric Guitar. There you go. I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. Please check me out on Twitter at Mitch Lafon, MITCHLAFON, and for all my interviews, head over to talkingmetal.com. And with that, I bid you a fond farewell. Arrivederci, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen. Bye for now.